go fast, an Intel Pentium 2.
Just be right there.
Getting a little quieter now.
Good.
Well, what you've been talking about all day appears to be now underway. We're still seeing cars in the streets now desperately trying to get home, obviously, or get to shelter.
Christiane, are the street lights... Christiane, are the street lights still on?
Yeah, they're still on. The street lights are on, the house lights are on, the apartment lights are on. A lot of cars just honking in the streets right now, obviously trying to get to shelter. And we had, I don't know how much of that you got, but we had an enormous amount of noise over the last couple of minutes. It started again.
Well, we received the entire burst, which started at 12:49 a.m. Baghdad time, your time. And this pattern of anti-aircraft fire from the rooftops in the city matches that pattern at the beginning of the Gulf War in January of 1991, where the anti-aircraft batteries actually, if you can imagine it, divide the sky into a grid pattern. And each battery is assigned to fire into that particular sector. So a lot of times, these huge guns on these rooftops are just firing away, and the roar from the guns, as you've heard, is thundering. They're firing away, the gunners are firing away, but they don't necessarily see what they're trying to shoot at, because aircraft are flying very high.
That's entirely likely, and certainly from this position right now, I cannot say one way or the other whether any strike has yet been launched on or around Baghdad or anywhere else in Iraq. All we know is that a response has been taken, a minimal response so far, but certainly enormous amount of noise over the last couple of seconds, anti-aircraft fire, anti-aircraft missile fire. And we're just going to wait, and this is clearly what you and everybody else has been talking about over the last 24 hours, and we'll wait and see how it develops, Bernie.
And a point just made by CNN military analyst, General Richard Neal, the fact that here you have AAA or anti-aircraft fire, but curiously, we do not hear the sirens as we heard more than a half hour ago.
Well, yes. Now, in my experience here, once things start, I don't recall hearing the sirens. I mean, it may have been different at the very beginning of the Gulf War, but towards the end, when I was here during '91, once the action was underway, the sirens were not as evident. I don't know whether that matches what the military analysts say, but I remember that as a fact the last time around. Certainly, the Iraqi people have been told, if they've been watching television today, that their country is now on a war footing, that the president they saw chairing a meeting of his Revolutionary Command Council, hoping that they and exhorting them to fight back and to resist. We've heard from the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz, who delivered a statement that indeed he believed that the UNSCOM report that apparently is leading to this action was ill-intentioned in his words and a justification for US-British air attack, in his words. And we have seen that there has been patriotic songs, kind of a guerrilla resistance video being shown on the television. So all here, in terms of what the public is getting on the public airwaves, the state-controlled television and radio, has been a sort of wake-up call and get ready for whatever might be happening. In the distance right now, we can hear rumblings and we can hear noise.
Christiane, I want to interrupt your reporting live from Baghdad to go right now to the White House and Wolf Blitzer.
That's right, Bernie. We have been told that President Clinton, who authorized the start of this kind of air campaign earlier this morning, is preparing to make a statement to the nation that he could come out very soon. He's also informed members of Congress that this kind of attack could begin late this afternoon, early evening, and it looks like activity obviously is taking place in Baghdad itself. So this is not a surprise that this is about to begin, or perhaps even has already begun. We have heard anti-aircraft fire from the streets of Baghdad. That's what we just saw. We don't know yet officially that the U.S. airstrike has begun. We do know that there was a burst of the siren about 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago, and now within the past few minutes, a burst of anti-aircraft fire in the streets of Baghdad. We also know that White House officials are getting ready for President Clinton to make a statement if, in fact, the U.S. has begun this cruise missile attack against positions in Iraq. President Clinton will want to explain why he made this decision. He did meet with all of his top national security advisors at 7:30 this morning, Washington time, shortly after he returned from his 3-day visit to the Middle East. And the word we're getting is that the U.S., all of his advisors were basically recommending to him that it's time to move forward, not to give President Saddam Hussein of Iraq, his government, time to find some sort of diplomatic maneuver that could put the U.S. in a very precarious position.
Okay, well, back to Baghdad now.
Can I interrupt a second?
Please go ahead, Christiane.
Bernie, what we're hearing is extremely loud thuds, the kind of thuds that would indicate bombs dropping or some kind of action happening here. So if we were to imply or to be able to analyze what we're hearing, it seems that it is not just reactive fire from here, but intervention may have already started, because we're hearing extremely loud thuds in the distance. And we can also hear in the distance now some of those sirens you were talking about.
If you're just joining CNN's live worldwide coverage, in Baghdad specifically, air raid sirens sounded more than a half hour ago, and our person you just heard, our chief international correspondent, Christiane Amanpour, reported on the air raid sirens going off, the anti-aircraft batteries opening up, and Christiane, you now report extremely loud thuds heard in the distance, and we should point out to our viewers that we are in Baghdad. That's the only place we are, and we can only report what we see and hear and what we know. Is the government saying anything?
Not yet, not at the moment. They have been saying things all day, as we've been reporting. The president himself was on television today exhorting the people to resist and to fight back. The deputy prime minister was also delivered a statement in which he attacked the UNSCOM report, the weapons inspection report that has led to whatever seems to be going on right now, and saying that it was simply a justification, in his words, for the kind of military intervention that he believes the U.S. and Britain want to take in any case.
It's very interesting. Christiane. You made that more than 15-hour drive from Amman, Jordan, over the desert highways and into Baghdad. And when you first came up on the satellite reporting live to us, the lights were on throughout. All of the lights in apartment buildings were on. There were cars moving up and down the streets and across the bridges over the Tigris River. But now that has changed.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the street lights are still on. As I say, we've got a small sector of visibility here. And what we can see here is that the apartment lights are on, the street lights are on. There are still cars going over the bridge. And as you can see, the mosque in the background behind me is lit. And so it's still not in a total crisis mode. It hasn't had a blackout situation, but clearly things are underway. And we've heard an incredible amount of noise here. There are anti-aircraft batteries around us, and they have been deployed in the last half hour.
And our senior White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer, reports that President Clinton has briefed members of Congress and that the president might be addressing the American people very, very shortly. What has President Saddam Hussein said to the Iraqi people, Christiane?
Well, he had a meeting, as I say, of his ruling Revolutionary Command Council, in which he was shown in a relaxed mood. He was shown meeting with other of his leadership, other members of his leadership, and he was talking about the security issues and other issues, but most importantly, talking to the people and asking them to resist and saying that they could resist. It is the same kind of rhetoric and speech making that we've heard from the president in past crises of these sort. Certainly we heard it during the Gulf War, and we've heard it throughout the intervening years when there have been these spikes of military intervention. we've had a bullet on this roof, so I'm not going to step up right now, but we're just going to be describing what is happening here, and that is that this is apparently underway, that we've heard a lot of anti-aircraft fire. It goes periodically.
This burst of anti-aircraft fire and the thunderous sound indicates the raw danger that you and other journalists place yourselves in by being right there. How far would you guess the nearest anti-aircraft battery firing is to you?
Well, you know, these are probably, it's close. What can I tell you? It's close. It's on the top of these buildings, and you know, they're on the top of all these buildings. Right now, we're, as everybody knows, the press is at the Information Ministry, and earlier this evening, we were told that we couldn't leave the ministry for security reasons, and people are on the roof here, as they usually are. You've seen our positions over the months and years that this has been going on, and this is where we're covering this story from.
As Christiane and the rest of the CNN crew, as they are in Baghdad, live at this hour, as you can see, it's just after 1 o'clock in the morning. We've seen now two bursts of anti-aircraft fire, one occurring at around 12:50, just before 12:50 in the morning, the other one just a moment or so ago. To our Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, what do we presume it was that triggered these two rounds of anti-aircraft firing?
Well, Judy, according to Pentagon sources, the attack plan that was to go off tonight included plans to start off with a coordinated attack of cruise missiles, both in the south of Iraq and also north of Baghdad, and presumably in the area of Baghdad, too. So those were timed to all go at the same time in Baghdad, south and to the north. Presumably more than 100 cruise missiles were fired to go off at once. Then that's to be followed up by attacks by manned aircraft from the U.S. aircraft carrier Enterprise, as well as air-launched cruise missiles from B-52 bombers that were based in Diego Garcia. This attack plan calls for 2 or 3 days of bombing selected sites, and it's not just designed to go after infrastructure that would be Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction facilities, but also to target some of those forces that support him, like the Special Republican Guard.
And Jamie, we're going to go right back to Baghdad now to CNN's Ben Wiedemann, who is in the Al Rashid Hotel. Ben.
For western Baghdad, we're seeing sporadic anti-aircraft fire. On previous occasions when I've been in Baghdad and there's been such action, it was much more intense. This is really quite sporadic. However, it does appear that one site has been hit or an accident took place. There's a large pall of smoke coming in the direction of the Rashid Hotel. Otherwise, as I said before, it's fairly sporadic. It is not as intense as on previous occasions. At the moment, I'm just seeing 1 or 2 flashes on the horizon. So it doesn't appear that the attack has come quite yet. It looks like they're just doing preliminary anti-aircraft fire in anticipation of something bigger.
And Ben, the thuds that Christiane described a few minutes ago, what's your interpretation of what that was?
It would be difficult to say, really. We're in different parts of the city, and from where I am, I couldn't hear any thuds, but I did hear a distant echo that sounded fairly strong. But from where I am, I did not hear anything too strong.
And when you say you can see smoke, can you describe for us a little in more detail where that's coming from?
That's coming directly west of the Rashid Hotel at a distance of about 1 kilometer away. It's gray smoke, and it's wafting over a park that's in front of me.
What would the targets potentially be in Baghdad?
Well, there's a variety of targets here. We don't know the precise details of whatever U.S. plans have been made for this attack, but certainly from where I am, they're presidential palaces, there are various government installations. So as regarding the specifics of the targets, I really couldn't comment upon.
All right, Ben, as we talk with you, we see streaks of light moving through the sky. We're not hearing anything at this point, but we certainly see some sort of activity there in the sky over Baghdad. Christiane, are you in a position to tell us more?
Well, it appears that there is some smoke coming from behind an apartment building across the street from where I'm standing. And we've said in the past that this may be where one of the presidential palaces is. It's impossible at this point to confirm what has been hit, if anything has been hit. But there does look like there is some smoke. And earlier we did see a flash of light back there. And that may or may not be what has happened right now.
General Richard Neal, military analyst for CNN, is joining us in this conversation. General, clearly we're not in a position to want to telegraph to the Iraqis. We don't have the information from the administration in terms of what their targets are. But what do we presume the targets are that the U.S. would want to strike in and around Baghdad or anywhere else in Iraq, for that matter?
I think we go right back to what the United Nations UNSCOM inspectors were looking for. Basically those facilities where either the instruments or, in fact, bits and pieces that could make up weapons of mass destruction, principally the chemical and biological. I think Jamie made a good point, as we've stated a few times before, that we're looking also at the Republican Guard and those forces that support and sustain the Iraqi regime, and taking out their capability as much as possible.
Do we have information, General, on where those forces are, where their headquarters are, where they stay?
Over time, they've developed a pretty good category of targets that, in fact, they cover all of those types of facilities and also warfighting capabilities that the regime has. So the United States forces, I'm sure, have put together a pretty lucrative target list that will search out those areas where the high suspicion is of possible ingredients for weapons of mass destruction, and also the Republican Guards, specifically the special Republican Guards that provide the security for the regime.
And General Neal, refresh us again on what the U.S. policy is with regard to targeting Saddam Hussein himself.
Well, it's been covered many times. Basically, it's not the policy of the United States to go directly after to assassinate or to go after a specific head of government. I think there's a congressional legislation that reads to that effect. Obviously, when you do your target planning, you selected different categories of targets, and I'm sure that the United States and British planners, as they put this together, were really focusing their energies on the weapons of mass destruction.
General, I want to ask you about something the Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott said in a statement just less than an hour or so ago, when he said, "I cannot support military action in the Persian Gulf at this time." He called into question both the timing and the policy. In your experience, has there ever been a situation like this before where the president may have initiated military action and the leader of the United States Senate questioned it?
Not in my experience, and I'll profess limited background on basically the political domain, decision-making domain, versus what military activity was initiated by the members of the armed forces.
At the direction of the President, the United States military forces have launched a substantial military strike against Iraq. The President decided to take this action this morning after reviewing the conclusions of the report to the United Nations Secretary General and Security Council yesterday by UNSCOM Chairman Richard Butler, and discussing the situation with his foreign policy team here at the White House. I expect the President to address the nation from the Oval Office within the hour. Following the President's address, there will be briefings by the President's senior advisors, first at the Pentagon with Secretary Cohen and General Shelton, then at the State Department with Secretary Albright, and finally here at the White House with National Security Advisor Samuel Berger. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not going to take questions. Thank you.
A very brief statement from the White House spokesman Joe Lockhart saying in just a matter of a few words that the President has decided to take, in his words, a substantial to launch a substantial military attack against Iraq. He said the decision was taken this morning, and it was taken, as we know, after the head of the UN weapons inspection team, Richard Butler, submitted a report to the United Nations, which in effect says that Iraq is not in compliance with its previous agreement to cooperate and to permit UN weapons inspections within Iraq. We also know from Joe Lockhart that we're going to get the president is going to speak to the nation within the hour. He said it's now 5:10 Eastern time in the United States. And he said the president will be speaking to the nation. We can assume that will be an address from inside the White House.
From the Oval.
From the Oval Office. Wolf Blitzer, you are at the White House. Just how much advance warning did you have?
Well, we had been told earlier in the day that this operation was imminent, that members of Congress were being briefed. I had been told earlier, don't make any dinner plans this evening. This is not a great surprise. The Clinton administration had been signaling its readiness to begin this, what Joe Lockhart calls a substantial military action against Iraq. It's been signaling it now for the past several hours. President Clinton will address the nation, Lockhart says, from the Oval Office within the hour, and that will be followed by separate briefings over at the Pentagon with Defense Secretary Cohn and General Hugh Shelton, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then over at the State Department with Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, we'll talk about the diplomatic aspects of this operation. And then over here at the White House, National Security Advisor Sandy Berger will follow with his own briefing. It's interesting, this is very similar to what occurred in January 1991 at the start of the air war against Iraq. First word came, official confirmation that the war had begun, came from White House Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater, who announced that the operation had begun. It was then followed by President George Bush's address to the nation, and then followed by separate briefings over at the Pentagon, the State Department, and over here at the White House. And of course, all of us remember those days very vividly as we see what's happening on the streets of Baghdad right now. We don't know the details of this substantial military operation, but clearly it has already begun, not only in and around Baghdad, but elsewhere in Iraq as well, and we'll be getting those details, of course, as the hours continue. Judy?
Go ahead. Jeff Greenfield has a question.
Well, just a quick question. You've noted in the past that the president has has been clearly not speaking from the Oval Office because of rather obvious reasons about the Monica Lewinsky story. Do you think is it the White House notion that this is grave enough and serious enough that on this occasion that just doesn't matter?
I think the White House is aware of that point, and they wanted to make the point that this is of such enormity that the president should go into the Oval Office, follow the footsteps of other presidents who have done the same thing during these times of national crisis, national security issues, and recalling that President George Bush did the same thing in 1991. So President Clinton, irrespective of the controversy, irrespective of the fact that the impeachment proceedings against him were supposed to begin on the House floor tomorrow, signed off this morning at that 7 a.m., 7:30 briefing. He will make the point, as will all of his advisors, that this was a unanimous decision, that they supported this decision, that it had nothing to do with the timing of the impeachment proceedings. Officials here, of course, are very sensitive to those accusations, and they've been stung specifically by the statement just released a little while ago by Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, who had been personally briefed by the president. Lott saying in a statement, quote, "I cannot support this military action in the Persian Gulf at this time. Both the timing and the policy are subject to question."
Wolf, as we listen to you, we have a live picture. We have had a live picture that is up for some time now from Baghdad. Nightscope images of the city at night. We've seen... These are pictures from within the past half hour. Let's listen here, and we have another image we're going to show you right after this.
Glow in our background now. It could be the refinery. Can you see it on the camera?
pictures we are seeing are pictures that were taken just minutes ago or within the last half hour, one of at least several rounds of anti-aircraft fire. These pictures were taken by one of the CNN cameras there in Baghdad at the Al Rashid Hotel. We heard our Ben Wiedemann reporting not long ago that so far, at this point, the firings have been sporadic, not in his words as would be a massive attack. He said, our own Ben Wiedemann said in Baghdad just a little while ago, that it's his sense that the full brunt of the attack has not begun yet, that the anti-aircraft fire that we've been listening to and watching has been sporadic up until now. Now we are back on a live picture in Baghdad, one of the CNN cameras there. Again, this is our night scope. It is now 1:16 in the morning, Baghdad time.
And
Bernie?
Judy, our military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre reported that the attack would be a coordinated cruise missile attack initially, with targets not just in Baghdad, but south and north of Baghdad. And we just heard our senior White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer harken back to the beginning of the Gulf War in January 1991 and the similarities. One of the men advising President George Bush was General Brent Scowcroft, National Security Advisor to President Bush. And General Scowcroft is watching this live picture, as you are indeed, all around the world. Your thoughts?
It was eerily reminiscent of that January date in 1991, where we were sitting with the attack plan in our laps, watching first reports of firing to the south, and I figured that's the anti-aircraft missiles being taken out, and then as it rolled up into Baghdad right according to plan. It was amazing then. It's amazing seeing this again, reminding one of it.
The United States and Iraq and allies on the side of the United States, namely Britain, in 1998 are doing what you and the Bush administration sought to do in 1991. Why?
I don't think that's exactly correct, Bernie. In 1991, our mission was to drive Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, and incidentally to diminish his capability to launch offensive attacks. Now the mission is to keep Saddam Hussein from rearming and be able once again to threaten the stability of the Gulf. So I don't think they're exactly the same.
As you know, as the world knows, impeachment proceedings against President Clinton are underway in the United States House of Representatives. Do you think Saddam Hussein has made any correlation between what is happening here and some of the criticism a sitting American president is getting and what he is doing vis-a-vis United Nations weapons inspectors in his country?
I think anyone who assumes he knows what's in Saddam Hussein's mind is making foolish assumptions. But one cannot rule out that possibility. The timing does create special problems, obviously. No question about that.
Your reaction to the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Trent Lott of Mississippi, saying that he cannot support President Clinton's decision in this military instance with this action, but that if action comes, and we presume it has, he, Mr. Lott, would support the troops. Your analysis of that. The Majority Leader of the United States Senate criticizing the President and Commander-in-Chief as American forces are in combat.
The timing of this attack creates great problems, and there are three aspects to it. First of all, it was a surprise. Not a surprise that an attack would come sooner or later if Saddam did not comply with his latest understanding about UNSCOM inspections. But the timing, there's been no preparation by the administration, either domestically or certainly with our friends and allies abroad.
This was launched at 10 p.m. London time. There can be no greater responsibility upon a Prime Minister than to ask British servicemen to risk their lives for the sake of peace and stability in another part of the world. And I feel that responsibility tonight profoundly. I spoke earlier today to Group Captain Rich Jones, who is in charge of British forces in the Gulf. British involvement will be significant, and I thanked him and them for their bravery and for their professionalism. And I wish them well in what we would be asking of them. This action, of course, could have been avoided. Since the Gulf War, the entire international community has worked to stop Saddam Hussein from keeping and developing nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and from continuing to threaten his neighbors. For the safety and stability of the region and of the wider world, he cannot be allowed to do so. If he will not, through reason and diplomacy, abandon his weapons of mass destruction program, it must be degraded and diminished by military force. Over the past few years, as you all know, we have engaged in endless diplomacy at every level and of every kind. But we must face the facts. Saddam Hussein has no intention of abiding by the agreements he made. UN Resolution 687, bringing to an end the Gulf War, made it a condition of the ceasefire both that Iraq destroy its weapons of mass destruction and agree to the monitoring of its obligation to destroy such weapons. Despite constant lies, prevarication and breaching of the agreed conditions, the weapons inspectors carried out their task, uncovering in the process vast evidence of weapons of mass destruction. In October last year, Saddam Hussein started to impede their work even more seriously than before. Months of negotiation followed. Finally, faced with the threat of force, Saddam Hussein averted military action by entering into a binding memorandum of understanding with Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General. But, despite that, he continued to obstruct. In August, he suspended cooperation with the UN inspectors. On October the 30th, he ended the cooperation totally. He resisted all appeals to come back into compliance with the agreements he made. Indeed, quite the contrary. He used the time both for further prevarication and for the dispersal of his military capability. As you know, on November the 14th, I issued the authority to strike against Iraq as part of a joint US-UK operation. At the last moment, aware that he was about to be attacked, Saddam offered full, unconditional, unrestricted cooperation with UNSCOM. Again, he made that promise. We called off that attack. We made that last extra effort to avoid the use of force. The inspectors, again, as you know, went back to work. We said at the time, very clearly, very directly, that we would hold Saddam to his word, and that should he break that word once more, there would be no warnings, no wranglings, no last-minute negotiations. So we made the position crystal clear to him and to the entirety of the world community. Richard Butler, the head of the UN Special Commission, promised his report on Iraqi cooperation within a month. It came out last night on time as scheduled. It is damning. It is a catalogue of obstruction. It shows quite clearly, one more time, that Saddam has no intention whatever of keeping to his word. He is a serial breaker of promises. And the reason for that obstruction, for breaking his word, is also now clear. It is his desire to develop these weapons of mass destruction. He has not for one instant yielded up that malign intent. The threat is now, and it is a threat to his neighbors, to his people, and to the security of the world. If therefore he is not stopped now, the consequences to our future peace are real and fundamental. We cannot responsibly let that happen. Let me remind you, since 1991, the inspectors destroyed or rendered harmless 48 Scud missiles, 40,000 chemical munitions, 690 tons of chemical weapons agents, 3,000 tons of precursor chemicals, and the Al-Hakam biological weapons factory, destroyed in 1996. However, over 30,000 chemical weapons warheads and 4,000 tons of precursor chemicals remain unaccounted for. The UN and the world community have shown by the resolutions passed, calling for unconditional cooperation with the weapons inspectors, that they know fully the seriousness of the threat Saddam poses. Following the Butler report, after more than a year of obstruction and a catalogue of broken promises, which I've outlined to you, we have no option but to act. Our objectives in this military action are clear: to degrade his capability to build and use weapons of mass destruction, and to diminish the military threat he poses to his neighbors. The targets chosen, therefore, are targets connected with his military capability, his weapons of mass destruction capacity, and his ability to threaten his neighbors. We are taking every possible care to avoid civilian casualties. I cannot, for obvious reasons, go into operational details. But I do want to say one further thing. Our quarrel is not with the Iraqi people. It never has been. The whole world should know that we have allowed Saddam to sell oil to buy as much food and medicine for the Iraqi people as is necessary. It is a lie for him to say otherwise. He could have fed and cared for his people, but he has chosen not to. Our quarrel is with him alone and the evil regime which he represents. There is no realistic alternative to military force. We are taking this military action with real regret, but also with real determination. We have exhausted all other avenues. We act because we must.
Prime Minister, can you say how many personnel are involved?
Appearing outside 10 Downing Street, British Prime Minister Tony Blair has just addressed the world, and he confirmed that military action, joint military action by the United States and Great Britain is underway at this hour. And for the first time, Mr. Blair revealed the name. It's Operation Desert Fox. He went on to say that it was launched at 10 p.m. London time. We should emphasize to you that President Clinton will appear in the Oval Office, and he will be addressing the American people and indeed the world very, very shortly within this hour. Prime Minister Blair called Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, a serial breaker of promises. He said that the Iraqi president cannot be allowed by the world to develop weapons of mass destruction. He said that this action underway now was inevitable. He also underscored Britain's participation. He said the British nation will have substantial involvement. He even identified Group Captain Rich Jones as the officer in charge of British forces in the Persian Gulf. Again, President Clinton will follow suit very, very shortly, and when he appears in the Oval Office to make his address, CNN, of course, will cover it live. Judy?
Bernie, we are joined here in our Washington studio by former United States Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, Secretary of State under President Bush. Lawrence Eagleburger, you heard every word that Tony Blair said. He ended up calling, saying that what the United States has is a quarrel with Saddam Hussein alone and the evil regime he represents. Did Tony Blair make a persuasive case for this attack?
Well, for me, he did, because I believed we should have attacked last August and last October. So I won't argue at all with the question that we needed to attack. I have serious problems about the timing, but I have no argument with the attack as such.
In the words of the British Prime Minister, it had to happen now because that's when, the day after Richard Butler submitted this persuasive report saying that the Iraqis have violated all their promises.
Look, I have to be careful how I describe my point about timing. Obviously, if we had left this thing to ride for 6 months, and we now get Saddam's latest challenge, I can't argue with the point that he needs to be responded to. My problem is, and I think we had to do it, but my problem is it is now taken in the face of the impeachment issue. To put it in the mildest possible terms I can, I think the whole process of getting here after wasting 6 months smells to high heaven. Having said that, I agree it had to be done. I cannot believe, however, that the president, when he was planning on doing this, wasn't thinking in the back of his mind that there is the impeachment issue as well. I don't blame Senator Lott for being angry. I think he gave the wrong answer. But it is the president, after all. You know, I have not commented on this whole mess with the president, but it is the president, after all, who put us where we now are, where people can challenge the wisdom of doing what we've done. I think we had to do it, but the mess is his in the making, and it's what's wrong with our foreign policy now. It's going to be wrong for a long time, because as this mess goes on, there are going to be challenges to every single thing the president decides to do. And it's an awful mess. We shouldn't be in this position, but we're there, and I think we had to do what we did, but it smells.
Are you saying that the impeachment threat hanging over the president has had a determinative effect on this attack, that's the reason it is happening today?
It's not by any means the only reason it is happening today, but I cannot believe that when the president was sitting there thinking about how we're going to respond, that this was not an element in his thinking.
Should the United States have waited?
No, the president was right. We should have done it. What's wrong is that we got into the mess we're now in, so that he is in the position where doing what is right can also be seen, and to some degree, I suspect, is a consequence of his concerns about impeachment. In other words, I'm not making myself clear, because yes, I think he had to do it, but I surely regret the mess that got us into the situation we're now in.
We're talking with Lawrence Eagleburger, former United States Secretary of State under President Bush. While we look at live pictures from Baghdad, you can see it's a little after 1:30 in the morning there. Earlier tonight, we saw several bursts of anti-aircraft fire. Christiane Amanpour, our correspondent, is on the ground there. Christiane, tell us what you're seeing.
Well, right now you're seeing fairly quiet skies. There are a few tracer bullets going up. You can see the sort of red imagery of tracers going up. We have been hearing sporadic noise, if you like, over the last hour or so. First of all, it started with a massive burst of anti-aircraft fire, anti-aircraft missile fire here in Baghdad. There was an enormous noise around the location where we are. We saw at least one location which appears to be emitting smoke, and another location within our on our horizon which showed an extremely powerful orange glow. Some have said that perhaps that might be the oil refinery that may have been hit. It was hit back in the 1991 Gulf War. And what we're hearing now, in the distance, if you like, is the constant rumble of activity. Whether it's incoming or outgoing is difficult to say from this vantage point, but the constant rumble of activity. But right here in downtown Baghdad at our location, for the moment, it is quietened down.
No, there isn't. Of course, we will take you to the president when he makes his statement.
Christiane, two quick questions. Can you still see Saddam Tower, the tall TV tower? You said it's the tallest one in the Middle East, and I have a second question.
Well, in any event, it's difficult to see from here. We know it exists slightly beyond our viewpoint, but it's a little bit difficult to see from where we are. So the answer as to whether it's been hit or not, I do not know.
And the second question is not a facetious one. What does the smoke smell like? Does it smell like electronic gear that's been burned or what?
It's acrid as smoke would be. I don't really know how to define or categorize the smell of. I mean, it may be these gusts of smoke coming from the refinery. It's hard to tell. We're hearing also periodic bursts of that siren, the alert siren that we heard much earlier on before the gunfire started. But we hear occasional air bursts. We see traces in the sky right now. As I say, it's toned down somewhat at the moment, but in the distance we can hear big booms, if you like, and we can also still smell this smoke, although it has subsided somewhat, the smell of this smoke.
It will be interesting to see whether President Saddam Hussein communicates with his people as this unfolds. We've heard from British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and within a matter of moments from the Oval Office at the White House, President Clinton will be addressing the American people and the world. It'll be interesting to see what Saddam does.
Well, Bernie, he did, in fact, address his people earlier today in that meeting that we've been reporting on at the Revolutionary Command Council meeting. He spoke to them at some length, basically saying that they have endured a lot over the last several years, that they were promised to have the sanctions lifted, that they've been weakened by that, the people have, and now it seems that not only are the sanctions not being lifted, but they are going to be under a joint US-British attack. Most of his speech was dealt with basically how they believe that they should now have the sanctions lifted. As you know, that's been the Iraqi mantra for the last 7 or 8 years, ever since they were imposed. So that certainly made up a big part of his speech today, and a last sort of plea for people to resist and to confront what he called the aggressors.
Indeed, he did speak earlier on Wednesday, and I'm curious to see whether he speaks since this attack has gotten underway. Watching all this with you around the world is our senior White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer.
Well, Bernie, I've been on the phone talking to a variety of administration sources, and they pointed out a few things of interest. One, this is not necessarily strictly a cruise missile strike. This is a strike that, if it hasn't already started, will shortly include U.S. fighters and bombers, aircraft dropping bombs at various targets in and around Baghdad, but elsewhere around Iraq as well. And one source said to me, don't be misled by only the pictures that we're seeing from in and around Baghdad, where our cameras are, of course, but there is activity going on, meaning U.S. military action at other targets around Iraq, which is a relatively big country. One official said to me, quote, this definitely is not a risk-free operation, meaning that U.S. pilots are involved in this operation, which the British Prime Minister Tony Blair said is named Desert Fox. The second point that I was told is that the U.S. government did give a heads up to various countries in the region to be on a little higher state of alert, given the potential fear that the Iraqi military could retaliate. Among those governments, Israel, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, all three of which were the victim of Iraqi Scud missile attacks during the 1991 Gulf War. And no one knows for sure if the Iraqis still have Scud missiles that are capable of reaching any of those countries, or they do not. But there was some indications given to those governments to at least be on a higher state of alert if, in fact, this military action were to begin. And, of course, as we all know now, the military action began approximately 40 minutes or so ago at around 5 p.m. Eastern Time here in Washington. Bernie?
President Bush's National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft, General Scowcroft, is still with us. And General Scowcroft, I want to ask you, as a president who's ordered this kind of military action, gets ready to speak to the American people and the world, what are the basic three objectives of such an address?
Well, I don't know that I would pick particularly three, but I think the important thing is to explain what is happening, why it is happening, and what the objective of the operation is. And as I said earlier, I think one of the problems is that the American people, they knew an attack was going to come sooner or later, I think, when Saddam once again refused the inspectors. I don't think anyone had expected it this early. And therefore, I think there's some psychological preparation that has to go on to detail what Butler's report said. Why is this important? Why does it have to be done now? Larry Eagleburger talked about the problems with doing it now. And they are clear problems. And I think the majority leader's reaction indicated that timing is a very serious problem. So the president needs to make that clear.
Three permanent members of the UN Security Council, Russia, France, China, are against this. It was virtually the same in 1991 during the Bush administration.
Well, they were not against to the extent they have been since then. Now, whether they're against this particular operation, I think we have to wait and see, because there was not a huge outcry when the United States said, if he doesn't comply this time, we'll react without warning.
You mentioned Lawrence Eagleburger's comments a moment ago when he said there are all sorts of problems with the timing. He said it stinks to high heaven or smells to high heaven, something to that effect. But he also went on to say that he thought, given the circumstances, the administration needed to go ahead today. The Allied forces should go ahead today.
I don't know whether they had to do it today, but the fact is that Butler said UNSCOM can no longer do its job. That was the trigger in the president's own language, that if UNSCOM was not allowed to do its job, we would take matters into our own hands, if you will. He is the commander-in-chief, and he determined that now was the time. And I think that's why, again, the majority leader said he supports the troops.
So are you saying, just one to button this up, General Scowcroft, are you saying that the administration should have waited?
I think it would have been great had there been able to be some better psychological preparation for what was coming. It is unfortunate that